Yep, good, Brent.
All right. Thank you and welcome everyone to the June 2023 breakfast briefing. I'll start by doing an acknowledgement of country. I personally am here on the Turrbal and Jarragara people's land, and I acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging, and I welcome Penny and Jason when they come to speak to recognise the lands that they're on. So today is a particularly important and pertinent conversation for us to have, and I'm hoping we have some really good conversation at the end of it. We're joined by two speakers, both of whom have day jobs in Allens, but their presentation has really been sparked by work Penny's been doing as part of her Juris Doctors at Melbourne University of Melbourne, and Penny wrote a really interesting paper about diversity and dispute boards. I think that was at the end of last year or early this year, and it's been published now. End of last year.
It was published start of last year.
And we've shared that link around. You'll also know that we've just signed off the diversity and inclusion policy statement for DRBF Region 3. So we have our local commitment for diversity and inclusion. And it is an issue for the construction industry as a whole, as well as for Dispute Resolution Board Region 3. We may have some more really up-to-date stats, Penny, because we just did a member survey, but it's pretty much in line with what I know you're going to share with us soon. And the conversation, as you listen to the session today, can you keep two things in mind? Because I really wanted us to have this conversation at the end, is we've got to look at tackling both the diversity of our own membership, as well as how we get diverse members being selected for dispute boards. And that's the conversation that we have at the end of ideas to how we get there. So with that background, said we've got two great speakers here. Penny Hollingdale, she's a Juris Doctorate at the University of Melbourne, almost at the end of it. So well done on that in and of itself. It's a lot of work. And otherwise to keep the Stovelet works as a paralegal in the competition, consumer and regulatory team at Allens. And Jason Dabblestein is one of the co-authors of another paper written by the Allens team, again on diversity in dispute boards, and and Jason comes from the disputes team in Allens with a specialization in infrastructure projects and their disputes, which we're all very familiar with as an audience. So without further ado, Penny, Jason, shall I hand it across to you to take us through your research and the discussions you've been having to date?
Sounds good. Thanks, Kerry. So I'll just let Jason share the slides.
Let me know if that's not sharing.
I think that's working well for me. All right. Well, hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our discussion about gender balance on dispute resolution boards. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. Next slide, Jason. Oh, it's gone.
Sorry, Penny.
That's okay.
My screen didn't like it when I shared it. Hold on one moment.
We'll try again.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's working for me. So can you go to the next slide, Jason, if that's working?
Jason, I think if you move your cursor to the lower left corner, the little navigation for PowerPoint will pop up and click the forward button there. Oh, actually, it looks like you're sharing your screen. You're not sharing the window.
Ah, yeah.
We can see your screen sharing item at the top. So be
Yes,
stop and
Jason,
then just
maybe.
share the window instead of
Yeah.
sharing the whole desktop screen. And that should work.
And Jason looks like he's frozen.
Yeah, he's
slightly.
frozen. Yep.
And why don't we run into backup? You got our copy of the
Okay.
slide,
Yeah,
so
I got
rather
you.
than best laid plans, best laid backup
Yeah.
plans.
Oh, we have the
Okay,
backup.
he's back.
Sorry, Kiri, would we be able to take you up on the, or Anne, would we be able to take you up on
Yep.
the offer to share screen? Thank you.
Yeah, that's where we're at.
There. For you.
All right, thanks, Anne. Yeah, just the next slide. Be great. Perfect, thank you. So as Kiri mentioned, my name's Penny and I'm a student at the University of Melbourne, and I'm joined by Jason, who's an associate at Allens. So today, Jason and I will be discussing the case for gender balance on dispute resolution boards and how to achieve it in practice. So first, Jason's going to discuss the structure of DRBs and the selection of DRB members. And then second, I'll present the case for gender balance on DRBs. Finally, Jason will discuss how diverse DRBs can be achieved in practice. So now I'll hand over to Jason.
Thanks, Penny. So I appreciate that everyone joining us today knows what a dispute resolution board is and what they do. So I won't spend too much time revisiting first principles. However, before Penny puts the case for gender balance on DRBs, I will briefly frame the discussion by touching on the structure of DRBs and also the selection of DRB members. With regards to the structure of DRBs, DRBs are a creature of the parties' agreement. So this means that the structure of the DRB can be as flexible in design as the parties require. With regards to resolving construction disputes,
Sorry, apparently have a unstable internet connection. Is it showing again?
Yep.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay, sorry about that.
I'll start again. So I guess with regards to resolving construction disputes, it can involve a DRB taking on a dispute avoidance function by issuing advisory opinions, a dispute determination function by issuing decisions of binding or interim binding effect, or both a dispute avoidance and dispute determination function. Ordinarily, a DRB is comprised of a panel of 3 senior professionals within the construction industry who have extensive experience and relevant specialist knowledge. However, on smaller projects, DRBs can also be comprised of a single individual. In relation to the selection of members for a 3-member panel, the DRB is usually established by each party appointing a member who then jointly appoints the 3rd member as the chair. This process should occur at the start of a project. The DRB members are to act independently and should not advocate on behalf of the parties that appointed them. This requirement for independence can result in DRB members being prevented from taking on other roles for a long period when retained on major projects. The construction contract or DRB agreement will usually prescribe the minimum requirements of DRB members. For example, the member will usually be required to have a minimum number of years experience in the construction industry and relevant qualifications in certain fields such as engineering, law, or business. With the minimum requirements, we'll usually set a low threshold to allow the parties to select candidates from a wide pool. However, in practice, parties tend only to consider candidates who have previous experience as a DRB member on other large projects. While this is understandable, given that the DRB has significant powers and there is risk associated with getting the selection process wrong, the consequence of this is that the pool of candidates is often small and limited to a group of experienced DRB practitioners. Furthermore, due to the historical gender imbalance that persists in the construction and legal industry, these candidates are almost always male, which Penny will elaborate on further now as she puts the case for gender diversity on DRBs.
So can we just skip forward a couple of slides. Next one. Perfect. Thank you. So thanks, Jason. So today I'm going to explain why gender balanced DRBs would be more effective, because including women on DRBs is likely to enhance their dispute avoidance, dispute resolution, and relationship preservation capabilities. So DRBs present a viable way of appropriately managing conflicts and disputes on major construction projects. However, currently they're not reaching their full potential due to their lack of gender balance. I'll be focusing on 3-person DRBs rather than 1-person DRBs, because multi-member DRBs allow gender balance to exist. And at the outset, I'd like to note that my argument inevitably involves speaking in generalizations and assumptions. And it's of course important to recognize that everyone's different and these generalizations don't always apply. Next slide, please. So I'll start by setting the scene. The construction industry is male-dominated across the world and is known for its strong masculine culture. So for example, in Australia in 2019 to 2020, the construction industry was comprised of 87.3% men and 12.7% women, making it the most male-dominated industry at the time. Also, most female construction industry workers are in support roles such as administration or human resources, rather than working on site or in senior management. The construction industry also has high levels of conflict, including high levels of interpersonal conflict. And importantly, communication problems are a key reason why conflicts and disputes arise frequently in construction projects. One study has found that unsuccessful communication between parties is the most frequent cause of conflicts on construction projects. Further, adversarial attitudes are also a key characteristic of construction projects, and this contributes to the escalation of conflicts into disputes rather than their resolution. Parties tend to adopt a confrontational stance, seeking to find who is to blame and thus liable for the cost, rather than cooperating to find and resolve solutions. And so these findings suggest that a different communication style and approach to conflicts may help resolve conflicts and disputes. So in terms of the importance of managing conflicts, conflicts are to some extent inevitable in the construction industry, and it's important to manage them appropriately. Conflicts aren't necessarily bad. They have beneficial aspects for construction projects, for example, by stimulating more creative and innovative solutions. However, conflicts can also increase project costs, cause tension between parties, and damage business relationships. Importantly, disputes are distinct from conflicts, and unmanaged conflicts can escalate into disputes, which can cause costly dispute resolution processes, project delays, increased costs, and relationship damage. So this highlights that conflicts must be managed effectively on construction projects. DRBs offer a way to manage conflicts and disputes appropriately on major construction projects. And so DRBs have 2 core roles: avoiding disputes and resolving disputes that aren't successfully avoided. And importantly, avoiding disputes encompasses avoiding and resolving conflicts. Currently, there's a severe lack of gender balance on DRBs. So in 2012, the DRBF's records revealed that out of the 2,191 projects that used DRBs, only 18 had female DRB members. So less than 1% of DRBs included women. And the updated DRBF records in Australia that Ron sent me indicate that there are currently 19 DRBs in operation in Australia. And out of a total of 32 DRB members, only 2 members are female, equating to 6.25%. There are also statistics regarding independent dispute avoidance and resolution panels. And although these panels aren't counted as DRBs by the DRBF, there are believed to be 20 IDAR panel members, of which 2 are women, so that equates to 10%. As I'll go on to explain, I suggest that this acute gender imbalance is preventing DRBs from reaching their full potential, and that gender balanced DRBs would arguably be more effective. So now I'll be speaking about the advantages of gender balanced DRBs, including enhanced dispute avoidance, dispute resolution, and relationship preservation abilities. So first, gender balanced DRBs would likely be more effective at avoiding and resolving conflicts, therefore avoiding disputes, because of women's different communication style and approach to conflicts, and because women's presence impacts the conflict dynamic. So first, women and men have different communication styles. Male communication is often more direct and assertive compared with women. And research has shown that in Australian workplace meetings, men communicate using direct and confrontational language, often interrupting and increasing volume to assert dominance. In contrast, women's communication style is characterised by cooperation and avoiding conflict. The construction industry in Australia, and likely other countries as well, has been found to have a dominant male communication style characterised by last slide, thanks. So it's found to have a dominant communication style characterized by aggression and frequent expletives. And so some academics have suggested that this dominant male communication style is a key reason why the construction industry experiences high levels of conflict. Both men's and women's different communication styles offer benefits for DRBs, so arguably a balance of both would be optimal. In terms of their approaches to conflicts, a study of the Australian construction industry has found that men and women respond to conflicts differently. Men tended to be more prone to aggression in a conflict, more willing to engage in conflict, more forceful in pursuing their own agenda, and less willing to compromise. Men tended to confront aggressive behaviour directly and use expletives and blocking techniques. And this aggressive and confrontational approach adopted by men can exacerbate conflicts, producing disputes. In contrast, women's communication style and approach to conflicts is more conducive to avoiding and resolving conflicts. The study found that women were more willing to compromise, approach conflict calmly, and withdraw to allow emotions to settle. Women's conversations during conflicts also suggest a focus on collective rather than individual values. Women also approach conflicts more indirectly rather than confrontationally. They also engage in collaboration, keep conversations open, and seek to form and preserve relationships. So due to this approach, having women on DRBs would likely help ensure communication is maintained between parties, lessening the risk that miscommunication causes conflicts and disputes. And this is really important because conflicts in construction projects often arise due to communication problems. And so this suggests that gender balanced DRBs would be more effective at avoiding conflicts and disputes. Finally, the presence of women in the construction industry also alters the conflict dynamic. So a study has found that most men change their behaviour to be more conciliatory if the other person in the conflict is a woman. The study found that in conflicts where at least one of the parties is a woman, the chances of conflict escalation are reduced because women tend to reduce confrontation and aggression. So if the presence of women on DRBs means that men, either the parties or the DRB members, are more conciliatory, this suggests that gender-balanced DRBs would be better at avoiding disputes. Next slide, please, Anne. Thanks. So evidence from mediation also supports this argument. Research regarding the distinctive styles and approaches of female mediators suggests that gender-balanced DRBs would be more effective at resolving and disputes as well as conflicts. So evidence suggests that female mediators are more likely to reach effective and long-lasting settlements compared with men who are more likely to mediate settlements that are broken. One study found that women's mediation style is attentive to the emotional tone in a situation and seeks to empower parties to generate their own settlement. It's also been found that female mediators seek to resolve underlying problems to create long-term solutions, whereas male mediators' approach tends to be more short-term and task-oriented. So this research suggests that having women on DRBs would enhance DRB's dispute avoidance role, helping to achieve better solutions to conflicts that resolve the core issues. Also, the solutions are less likely to break down and be disputed. Regarding DRB's dispute resolution role, The research suggests that gender-balanced DRBs would likely produce more effective and lasting recommendations that parties will adhere to, thereby avoiding escalation, requiring more expensive and time-consuming dispute resolution processes. Next slide, please, Anne. So women's focus on creating and maintaining relationships also suggests that gender-balanced DRBs would be more effective. Based on psychology research, academics have developed the theory that women act according to an ethic of care, which characterizes women's behavior and thinking as empathetic, compassionate, and caring. This ethic of care seeks to maintain relationships. In contrast, men follow an ethic of justice, which focuses on impartially and impersonally applying rules. And so an important part of DRB's role is ensuring parties maintain good relationships while dealing with conflicts. And this in turn allows major projects to be completed more efficiently, because a relationship breakdown can lead to parties not working together effectively and can cause costly and time-consuming disputes. So gender-balanced DRBs would likely be more effective because they would likely be better at maintaining relationships. Research also suggests that women's language style helps build relationships by forming bonds, creating community, and avoiding isolation. In contrast, men's language style focuses on information exchange and preserving personal independence and status in social hierarchies. Both of these styles of communication can be beneficial in negotiations and therefore present advantages for DRBs. However, arguably they're complementary, and it would be beneficial to include both styles on DRBs. Therefore, gender-balanced DRBs would likely be more effective because having female members would help build and preserve relationships. Next slide, please. And so for my final point, gender-balanced DRBs are also likely to be more effective at avoiding and resolving disputes because of the benefits of diversity more generally. So research highlighting the benefits of gender diversity on company boards suggests that gender-balanced DRBs would be more effective at both avoiding and resolving disputes due to their enhanced problem-solving and decision-making abilities. The company board research is arguably applicable to DRBs because both company boards and DRBs involve group decision-making and problem-solving. The benefits of gender diversity on company boards have long been recognised. Board diversity is beneficial because it produces more balanced discussions and provides different perspectives. Diverse company boards also exhibit increased creativity and innovation, greater market understanding, and more effective problem solving. Problem solving and decision making are enhanced because diverse boards result in different perspectives and cognitive conflict, meaning that decision makers consider a wider range of alternatives and consequences. Diversity also avoids groupthink, which is important for three-person DRBs, where a key advantage of having multiple members is generating different ideas and perspectives. And so these benefits of diversity would be advantageous for DRBs, where creative solutions and problem solving are often required to resolve conflicts and disputes. So this research from company boards suggests that gender-balanced DRBs, due to their gender diversity, would resolve conflicts more effectively, thereby avoiding disputes, and they'd also resolve disputes more effectively. And so research from arbitration panels also supports this. The similarities between DRBs and arbitration panels means that research regarding gender diversity on arbitration panels arguably has probative value for DRBs. Like DRBs, arbitration also lacks gender diversity. So for example, in 2012, an American Bar Association survey found that only 20% of arbitrators were women, and women were neutrals in only 17% of arbitrations. There was also a more severe underrepresentation of women in construction law arbitrations compared with other areas. The benefits of gender diversity on arbitration panels include the benefits of diverse perspectives and more accurately representing society's demographics. Diversity legitimizes the dispute resolution process by including people from different backgrounds and demographics. In the 2021 International Arbitration Survey, the majority of respondents stated that diversity across an arbitration panel has a beneficial impact on their perception of arbitrators' independence and impartiality. And as courts have noted, DRB's credibility is vital to ensure parties respect DRB's recommendations and thus allow DRBs to effectively resolve disputes. Gender balance on DRBs would help improve their diversity and demographic representation. Therefore, it would likely enhance DRB's credibility and effectiveness. So to conclude, DRBs are an effective way to avoid and resolve disputes on major construction projects. However, as I've explained today, gender balanced DRBs would likely be more effective at avoiding and resolving disputes and preserving relationships. So Jason will now discuss how gender diverse DRBs can be achieved in practice.
Thanks, Penny. And I have to apologize, but I can't see the slides on my screen. I think my Zoom's playing up a bit, but I can keep talking. So I just might need to trust that Penny can sort of direct you to the relevant slide. So I will now discuss sort of from a practical standpoint how new entrants can gain DRB experience, as well as the strategies that are being adopted by the DRBF and could be utilized by parties to grow the pool of DRB candidates and also improve the gender diversity of DRB panels more generally. So in relation to the appointment of new entrants, for someone who is a new entrant, whether male or female, obtaining DRB experience is usually easier said than done. This is not simply because of the tendencies of parties to select experienced candidates with extensive construction and project experience, but also because suitable candidates may be overlooked where they've never been on a DRB before. Where a candidate does not have prior DRB experience, usually they will be appointed in a number of different circumstances, including because they have a particular expertise that is seen as desirable for the project. For example, the project may involve the construction of road tunnels, so DRB members with significant experience on road tunneling projects will usually be preferred. Secondly, due to the unavailability of other candidates with the preferred prior experience. Thirdly, on the basis of perception, misguided or not, by the appointing party that the individual will be favorably disposed to that party. For instance, a candidate might be perceived as being contractor friendly. Finally, by the two nominated DRB members agreeing to appoint as chair someone who has not previously held a DRB role. However, this rarely occurs in practice due to the perceived importance of the role of chair. A number of steps can be taken to encourage a more diverse makeup of DRBs. Firstly, parties and their legal representatives can take a proactive approach and ensure at least one female is listed as a potential candidate for appointment, even without any prior DRB experience, as well as ensuring the candidate list is diverse in a broader sense. The DRBF, as Kiri mentioned, the DRBF has already recognized the need for diversity on DRBs through its diversity and inclusion statement, which provides that the DRBF will take the steps reasonably available to ensure that wherever possible, lists of dispute board members or chairs the DRBF provides include a fair representation of diverse candidates. The DRBF also...
And can we go to the next slide, please?
The DRBF also encourages diversity in parties' appointments to DRBs, as well as encouraging senior and experienced DRBF practitioners to support, mentor, sponsor, and encourage diverse DRBF members to pursue DRB appointments. More recently, I understand, again, as Kiri mentioned, that Region 3 of the DRBF has ratified a similar statement and established a diversity and inclusion working group to identify and support the actions set out in the statement. Similar to the steps taken by the DRBF, I also suggest that parties should give consideration to appointing senior professionals regardless of their prior experience as a member on a DRB. Barristers and senior construction lawyers and professionals will often have had exposure to the DRB process and will be capable of performing the work of DRB members regardless of their prior experience, although a limitation remains around conflicts. Another solution to expanding the pool of DRB practitioners and improving gender diversity in the context of 3-member panels is for parties to include a requirement in the construction contract that at least one DRB member must not have prior DRB experience and/or must be a female. This solution could be implemented without restricting the party's choice of candidates by prescribing in the contract that where the DRB members appointed by the parties both have prior DRB experience or are both male, that the DRB members must, in selecting the third member, appoint a new or female candidate. It would also be open to parties to agree that the DRB panel, once in place, could determine amongst themselves the position of chair. Even where there is no contractual stipulation in light of the DRBF's adoption of the diversity inclusion statement, it might also be suggested that a responsibility falls upon experienced and male DRB practitioners who are appointed to a 3-person panel to consider jointly appointing a third DRB member that does not have prior DRB experience and/or is a female to the panel. If that were to occur, the likely outcome by those appointments would be to expand the pool of experienced DRB candidates and improve female representation on DRBs generally. So that concludes our presentation on the case for gender balance on DRBs and how to achieve it in practice. Penny and I hope you have enjoyed our presentation, and we are now happy to answer any questions about the topics we have covered.
Thanks so much, Jason and Penny. And it's interesting in the context of dispute boards already have an amazing track record for their success. So it's hard to say, if this is one area by comparison to mediations and arbitrations, you go, how do we make them more effective? Because their success rate's already sitting at 98, 99%. That was, but I think the argument is made around diversity, and I'm sitting here with the, we have this collective challenge of 12% of our members are women. Only 6% are actually currently on boards. So if we can't get the work, we won't stay as well. I mean, there's a really straightforward commercial proposition there, and it's a problem across the industry broadly that we can't attract our women in, and we can't we can't keep them, because the stats on the number of women who leave the construction industry because they can't drive or they can't they don't succeed in this industry, perhaps, is one way to put it quite bluntly. So before I keep on rattling on, Jason, you've got your hand up. Oh no, that's my hand. Does anyone have a specific question? Otherwise, maybe Ron, because you're probably at the forefront of trying to encourage clients right now to build diversity on their boards. Because as secretary, I imagine clients are coming to you and going, please give us potential names, give us shortlists. Well, what do you think the current market behaviours are?
If I can just use as a specific example, one of our major users, TFNSW, has a policy of requiring diversity from all of its suppliers, and DRB members are just one of the categories of suppliers. I think they have a target, and I can't remember whether it's 35 or a number in the 30% range, that's what they are setting as a target from their suppliers generally, and that will flow on to DRB members in due course. Larissa Jones, who is a member of our working group, couldn't make this morning, but she's one who we're going to get more specifics from her about what that policy means in practice. But it's an interesting approach that, rather than the industry, DRBF initiating it, it's the owners that are initiating that kind of policy.
And that's something, that's an idea we want to spread more broadly. Kevin had his hand up, then Tim, I think.
Yeah, my real hand, not fake hand. I can't find the fake hand. Anyway, thanks for that, for the presentation, Penny and Jason. And I wondered, I saw a lot of posts on the conference, the international conference last week, that seemed to show a huge amount of women in the audience that were in attendance at the conference. And so I'm interested in a perspective that you might be able to share, that as to what seemed to be a fairly large diversity of, experienced female dispute board members or certainly the attendees at the conference, and how you might be aware of how they've managed to do that?
Yes, thank you, Kevin. We did have a lot of women in the audience at the International Conference. And in fact, we had a diversity and inclusion breakfast on Friday morning. While the two hosts are women, they decided before the breakfast not to emphasize gender, but to speak more broadly about diversity through all of the layers that we have in the DRBF. So, you know, it's gender, but it's also engineers versus lawyers. And I think that was a hot topic for this particular group because many of the women that you saw in those posts come from the legal side. There were definitely some female engineers and also some owner representatives who were female. And I think I can think of at least one contractor representative who was female in the audience. So that was an area of topic for them. Diversity and inclusion here in Latin America also has language and culture. So we had translation, which was primarily English, Portuguese, and Spanish to try to accommodate the needs of our audience in this particular space. So lots of ways of looking at diversity and inclusion. For me personally, I think inclusion is a really important part of it. And I got a lot of feedback that people felt very welcomed here at this conference. And I think in part because the audience was so diverse and people felt to connect with. Now, there's a couple of people here on this call who were there. Ian and Graham and Barry were all also present. So I don't know if they had any particular takeaways. I know they attended the breakfast as well. Anything you gentlemen want to say about perspective?
Yeah, and I'll just say you've said it all. The majority of discussion, particularly not just at the diversity and inclusion breakfast, but more generally, was more about the diversity rather than the actual gender. The gender issues of male versus females on dispute boards was almost taken for granted in that discussion. So that's what I would, you summarised it, but I just emphasise that while today we've been talking specifically about gender, the topic is broader.
Yeah, and we often talk about gender because the theory is if you can crack that nut, the other diversity criteria will follow. And we certainly haven't cracked the gender diversity nut. Graham, so, you know, you've been doing dispute boards for a very, very long time. What do you think will shift the dial?
One is persuading the owners to include those requirements. My view is that is probably the only way to shift the dial. Certainly the most important way is to persuade owners who are creating dispute boards, whether they include provisions in their contract or whether they have policies that we've just discussed. I think that's the single most effective way to create a better situation. Kerry.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I'm going to come back to Jason on that. Tim, did you have your hand up? Did you have a question? No, sorry, I must have missed that earlier. Can I then throw that back to Jason?
David has a hand up.
Oh, David, apologies. And you're on mute.
Fix that. Yeah, Penny, terrific paper. Really, really well done. And as a senior fellow of Melbourne Law School, yeah, terrific. I was just wondering where you got some of your data from in relation to the different characteristics between the male and female approach, which I don't disagree with. I mean, in my 50 years of having a close female partner, yeah, and some of the very best senior associates I had, and colleagues in my 10 years in the actually in transport. Many, in fact, the majority of the real stars were women. And I've never had a problem with it at all. But I was just wondering where you picked up the data from, because I don't disagree with it. It's fantastic. And but I was just wondering where you picked it up from.
Yeah, so there was one really good article that was specifically focused on the construction industry and analysing different traits of men and women and their communication style and approach to conflicts. That was more in the construction industry more broadly, not DRB focused, but I drew on a lot of their findings because they conducted an actual study. So the authors are Loosemore and Galia. So cited in my paper if you want to look it up. Yeah, that article was really helpful.
Yeah, Natalie Galea has done brilliant research into gender norms in the Australian construction industry, David. Check her stuff out.
Kiri, one of the areas that I think we need to do better at is the number of potential DRB members who are female is quite low. And I don't know whether it's kind of career choices or you know, particularly the females who are eligible candidates are often still working in, you know, consulting organisations or law firms, and not so many of them become available post their first career to become DRB potential members. And I think that's an area where we're not capturing enough potential candidates for DRBs.
Yeah, and I might even throw that open to Louise. Jennifer, thank you, Louise, because you probably, where do we go at the end of our careers?
Well, I think that certainly is an issue. And I also think that the way I found my way into dispute boards was actually being involved on the client side with contracts which had dispute boards. And that was when I first became aware of them, because transport was insisting that I stick a dispute board into my contract. And then having experience of being, you know, the project director and whatever in relation to that contract made me see it as something that I could potentially do, and also made me visible to dispute board people as a potential candidate. And I do think we are starting to see some reasonably senior women appearing at dispute boards on the client and contractor side, who probably are not in any way thinking of themselves as potential future dispute board candidates, but are perhaps a source there. And I just, another sort of reinforcing the difference in approach between men and women. The dispute boards I've been on, the contracts I've been associated with, the ones that have done best at avoiding disputes are ones which have started at the beginning with a sort of contractor and client workshops around what sort of behaviours are we going to bring to this contract, and taking an active role in trying to ensure the parties deal with one another on a, should we say, more female basis. So it is, I think that the gender diversity, even though there's no actual diversity involved there, but those approaches can be taught. And maybe we should, Ron, there's maybe something for you to think about on the next round of dispute board education programs as to how to teach the men to behave more like women.
We actually used a session in the last training workshop on soft skills, which is a kind of another polite way of saying the same sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think there's something about how we articulate what the skills of our members are, that's possibly worth a bigger conversation. Jennifer, did you want to weigh in on this conversation?
I suppose all I want to really say is that I think actually anybody who is on a dispute board is bringing those skills, the soft skills. I mean, really, all dispute resolution practitioners are ideas generators, are good communicators. I don't actually even think it's a gendered thing. That's just, I think, a basic skill set. If you're going to be in dispute resolution, you need to be a good communicator with good strategy, empathy, so I don't actually think it is gendered.
But people with cognitive diversity, people who are coming from different backgrounds and different experiences, is still a positive. Can I throw back to Jason? Because Jason, your proposition is that one of the propositions was that construction contracts can start including an explicit requirement for the parties to appoint a dispute board member who either has not been a dispute board member before or who comes from a diverse background. Is that in Alan's day-to-day practice? Are you seeing that come through in market as a market change?
Not at this stage. I think that was sort of, a suggestion as to, well, how do you get there without, restricting parties' choices? Because, I think that would be the real hard selling point on a clause like that, is that, well, how do you do it without restricting either the contractor's choices or the owner's choices? And so, but that is obviously one way that you might advance the cause, whether that's to, increase diversity in a broader sense, or if it's to, bring in new entrants, or to, increase gender diversity, whatever the clients or the whatever the cause might be. That's one way you could do it.
Don.
Just one question, Jason. In your paper, you talked about the 2 experienced members selecting a 3rd inexperienced member as chair. I think what we've been implementing in our Region 3 is that 2 members experienced who might be nominated by the principal and contractor can nominate an inexperienced 3rd member who doesn't have to be the chair. And I think that's just the point of difference, is that one of the first 2 can be chair. And also a practice that we've seen in a number of our dispute boards is rotating the chair. So if an inexperienced member starts out, particularly these multi-year contracts where they may not be the chair to start with, but the chair role can be rotated. That's another useful way of gaining experience.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I was hesitant to say that they should be nominated as chair, because there is a perceived importance of that, and depending upon how the dispute resolution board agreement is drafted, the chair could have a pivotal role on the board. So it might not be the right solution in all scenarios, but if you have that situation where the 2 members are appointing the 3rd member, and then they agree amongst themselves who the chair is, or if they rotate it, that would also be a way to sort of get around that issue of having an experienced member in the role as chair.
Okay, I've got Don, then Barry. So Don.
I was actually going to make the same point that Ron has just made. I think it's important to provide that flexibility in appointment of the chair. I think it would open up more opportunities for inexperienced members if the 2 nominated members selected the 3rd, and then collectively they were able to determine who would be the chair. So I'd support Ron's point on that. Thanks.
Yeah, and I think that's right. And chair's not the role you want to do on your first dispute board. Yeah. Barry.
Good morning, all. I think Kevin might have made inadvertently made a bit of a suggestion this morning, in that he talked about the Society of Construction Law Conference. Now, my recollection is that organisation is fairly female dominant. If perhaps, Kiri, you probably know more about that than most.
Certainly more balanced than this group.
But perhaps in terms of trying to gain more, and particularly middle experienced members or people who are interested in the construction industry, a presentation to the Society of Construction Law might be something that the DRBF could do, which would be valuable in trying to encourage more women into the construction industry and more particularly into dispute board roles.
Well, I'm going to hand across to Kevin because Kevin has a cunning plan already.
Well, that's that's one of my cunning plans. So that's on my list, Barry. Yeah, we're looking to run a soccer event on dispute boards and to get the right people in the room and have a panel discussion, etc. So target within the next 6 months to get that sorted. So yep, we're on to that. And I guess I wanted to just a bit of a follow up to my query there with Anne before, in terms of actions that we can do. Is it going out and targeting as they have in, I guess, region 2, where you've got these larger number of female that are more from a legal background. If we go and target, that sort of resource, opportunity to find additional members in the future, is that a particular problem that we're going to have if people are still employed within law firms to be able to get more involved in dispute boards? Or is that something that we can, so long as they're not conflicted and maybe they're not working front end so much, is that something that we could probably navigate all right? I don't know who I put that to.
think it's a
I'll have a
perception.
crack at that, Kevin. I think because I was previously a partner in a major law firm, as some others on the call are, but the main issue is conflicts. That your fellow partners won't want you taking a DAB role that conflicts the firm out of every other role on the project, remembering that a DAB role will, generate some revenue for one person, whereas the other roles on the project will generate revenue for a large team. And so it's only when the partners or former employees of a major firm go out into a smaller independent business like what I've done, that you suddenly become a candidate. I would never have thought of putting my hand up for DAB members as a partner at Clayton Utes, because I certainly wouldn't have won any friends there.
No, the conflict issue is huge, and it does require people who take those independent directions in their careers. And there could, so I don't know, Penny, are there any stats on women in construction industry and what percentage go on to do independent orientated careers versus staying in large organizations? Could be interesting.
Not that I'm aware of. There aren't that many statistics focused on that.
But we're not unheard of, are we, Louise and Jennifer? Anne, your hand's up.
Yeah, I went to that breakfast on Friday morning and I talked at length to Lindy, who ran it, one of the two women who ran it, and I've known her for several years. And Lindsay, she indicated that they have a similar problem as what I think exists in Region 3, with the difficulty identifying women with appropriate length of experience and appropriate depth of experience to become members and to get onto DABs. They're all a bit younger, or the bulk of them are a bit younger. I think it's a little unrealistic to expect you're going to be able to identify a whole lot of women tomorrow. It's going to take a few years. I think encouraging people into the DRBF who in the future are going to have the length of experience that would be acceptable to the parties is appropriate, so they can be in place in time. But it's not going to happen tomorrow, I don't think. And apparently the same thing applies in Region 2.
Anne?
say all the regions, it's a global issue. Everyone has some version of this. So I can tell you anecdotally, I've had a conversation like that, Ian, with a woman who's with a big consultancy firm, and she's been asked multiple times to be appointed to a dispute, turned it down because of wanting to preserve her firm's ability to continue working in that space. But as she begins to transition, just like many of you transitioning towards the end of a career, seeing dispute boards as a new avenue for service, that is still, I think, viable. And you'll see more women because they're now coming to that space. She's running a company. She's a female leader, and she'll be moving into that space in due course. I also have an interest about a woman who was appointed to be a chair on a DRB in California. The senior representatives from the owner and the contractor are both female. And she was actually recommended by the contractor because the owner of that construction firm was a female. And she said, I'd like to see a female on this board. So someone made that suggestion as well today, that party representatives eventually may find themselves in their careers in a place to consider board service. I've seen this with people of any type. Sometimes it's planting the seed. Have you ever considered wanting to serve on a dispute board sometime? It's usually that mentoring piece of someone that you know and respect, encouraging you to consider becoming a dispute board practitioner. We should all be intentional about that messaging to grow the pool in all the different ways that diversity are important to us as a group.
Yeah, and there's still a real practical that the numbers aren't lying. They're even where we have women, they're not getting on the boards. So women will not stay in an industry where they can't get the work. So there's a real practical, there's a two-way pull going on, Ian. You're only going to attract women if they get the work, and at the moment they're not getting the work. So it's a two-edged sword that we're playing with here. So we have to do both things. We have to create an environment that's more attractive for women, and actually have the availability of the work. And on that case, I might go, Jason, Penny, if you can convince Allens to have this conversation broadly in front of owners and clients, and to talk about dispute resolution and diversity in its widest fronts, and to showcase this association, and to talk about that option of client-related policies, to showcase some of the great diverse candidates that are sitting amongst the membership, and to make the case even for contractual obligations. You'll get a few takers from the foundation. So we're coming up to the end of the time. Were there any more questions from anyone?
Just a plug for our next event is on the 4th of July, on 3rd of July your time, Anne, hopefully. So Tuesday, the 4th of July.
Thanks, Ron.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Kiri, I just want to say